The silent departure. The grand chamber of the Galactic Concorde fell silent as the message appeared simultaneously on every delegate's communication panel. No dramatic announcement, no impassioned speech, just a simple text transmission that caused the galaxy's most powerful beings to freeze in collective shock. The United Earth Alliance hereby terminates all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Concorde, effective immediately. All human representatives are recalled. All treaties requiring human oversight are suspended. This decision is non-negotiable. High Chancellor Vexterra of the Atraxian Collective, a being composed of shimmering light contained within an environmental suit, was the first to break the stunned silence. "This must be an error," they said, voice modulator wavering. "The humans cannot simply leave." But they had. As delegates frantically accessed their communication channels, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human embassies were emptying. Trade stations operated by Earth were transferring control to automated systems. Military observation posts along disputed borders were going dark. It wasn't just a diplomatic withdrawal, it was a complete disengagement from galactic affairs. The humans, the very species that had spent the last century painstakingly building bridges between ancient enemies, crafting compromise where none seemed possible, pushing for rights for developing species, had simply walked away. Ambassador Krulzek of the Dorsai hegemony slammed his armored appendage against the polished table. "This is outrageous. We have 7 major peace treaties that require human oversight. Without their mediators, the Outer Rim could collapse into war within days." He wasn't exaggerating. Despite being relative newcomers to the galactic stage, humans had carved out an unusual niche. Not the most technologically advanced, nor the most militarily powerful, they instead excelled at something few species bothered to master: diplomacy. They seemed uniquely capable of understanding the perspectives of beings wildly different from themselves, of finding common ground where others saw only irreconcilable differences. "We must send an immediate delegation to Earth," suggested Ambassador Thela of the Minervian Republic, her tendrils twisting anxiously. "They cannot abandon their responsibilities like this." "They just did," replied Zorav of the Cantari Dominion, a species known for their ruthless pragmatism. His reptilian eyes narrowed. "The question is why? And why now?" The timing was indeed suspicious. Only last month, the Concorde had dismissed Earth's repeated warnings about corruption within the Resource Allocation Committee. Humans had presented evidence that several core worlds were diverting development funds meant for struggling colony worlds, but the Concorde had deemed it insufficient to warrant investigation. Similarly, they'd ignored Earth's protests about the treatment of the newly discovered sentient species in the Centauri sector, with the Concorde ruling them pre-technological and therefore open to guided development, a polite term for exploitation. Were these the reasons for their withdrawal? Or was something else at play? Ambassador Ilara Chen stood before the entire diplomatic corps of Earth in the vast underground chamber beneath New Geneva. 1,000 men and women who had dedicated their lives to forging a better galaxy now faced an uncertain future. "I understand your frustration," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Many of you have spent decades building the relationships that we're now severing. You've negotiated treaties that may collapse without our oversight. You've made promises to allies that we're breaking." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. "But I ask you to trust in the Council's decision. For too long, we've been the conscience of a body that refuses to listen. We've been the peacekeepers in conflicts we didn't start. We've compromised our own principles to maintain a system that exploits the vulnerable and protects the powerful." Chen had been the face of human diplomacy for 15 years. Her skill at negotiating impossible agreements was legendary. She'd ended the Proxima War with words when fleets had failed. Now she was overseeing humanity's most dramatic diplomatic maneuver yet. The Galactic Concorde will soon discover what the galaxy looks like without humanity serving as its moral compass and mediator, and when they do, we'll be ready with our terms. On the frontier world of Vesper's Edge, Governor Lassagne watched the feeds with growing alarm. This remote colony sat precisely on the border between the territories of two ancient rivals, the Tauran Imperium and the Seln Confederation. For 30 years, a fragile peace had held here, enforced by the presence of human peacekeepers and the Earth-brokered Treaty of Caldera. Now the human garrison was preparing to leave. "You can't do this," Lassain pleaded with Commander Rice, the human officer overseeing the evacuation. "The moment your ships depart, the Taurans will move in. They've wanted this system for centuries." Rice continued checking her inventory pad, her expression impassive. "Governor, I have my orders. All human military and peacekeeping forces are being recalled." "Then you're condemning us to death." Rice finally looked up, her eyes hard. "No, Governor. The Concord is condemning you. They've had 3 decades to build a sustainable peace here, with all the resources of 1,000 worlds at their disposal. Instead, they relied on us to do their job for them." She gestured to the sky, where the last transport was descending. "Maybe when enough worlds like yours suffer the consequences of their indifference, they'll finally listen." As Rice departed, Lassain received an urgent communication from the colony's sensor array. Tauran warships had just entered the system, far sooner than anyone had anticipated. They'd been waiting, watching, planning for this moment. The peace that humanity had so carefully constructed was already beginning to unravel. Deep within the Terran Security Council's fortress beneath Mount Olympus on Mars, Admiral Hiroshi Takamura reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The holographic display showed red hotspots appearing across the galaxy, places where Earth's withdrawal was already leading to instability. "It's happening faster than we projected," noted his aide, Colonel Bray. The Seln-Tauran confrontation wasn't expected for at least a week. Takamura nodded grimly. "Many of these powers have been waiting for this opportunity. They never wanted peace. They simply feared our intervention." The Admiral zoomed in on a cluster of systems near the galactic core. "Any word from our operatives in the Concord?" "Yes, sir. Exactly as predicted. Chancellor Vexterra has called an emergency session. They're debating sending a high-level delegation to Earth to discuss our concerns." Takamura allowed himself a thin smile. "And our defense grid?" "Fully operational, sir. Phase 2 of the Aurora Protocol is complete. Any unauthorized vessels attempting to enter Sol space will be intercepted." The Admiral stood, gazing at the galaxy map with its spreading conflicts. "Then we wait. Let them see what they've taken for granted all these years." His aide hesitated. "Sir, some of these conflicts could result in significant civilian casualties." "The Vesper's Edge colony." "I'm well aware of the cost, Colonel," Takamura interrupted, his voice sharp before softening. "But we've tried warnings. We've tried appeals to conscience. We've tried working within their system. How many more years should we spend watching the Concord ignore the exploitation of developing worlds? How many more corrupt decisions should we validate with our participation?" He pointed to another section of the map, where a small, unassuming system glowed with a distinct blue marker. "And what about this? The Sigma Protocol findings that the Concord dismissed as human paranoia." Colonel Bray's expression darkened. "The deep space anomalies." "Yes. While the Concord debates trade quotas and luxury resource allocations, something is coming, Colonel. Something they refuse to acknowledge or prepare for. And I will not wait for that threat to arrive while Earth remains bound by treaties that limit our ability to protect ourselves." The room fell silent as both officers contemplated the true reason behind Earth's withdrawal. Not just frustration with Concord politics, but fear of what lay beyond the galaxy's edge. The anomalies that human deep space sensors had detected 3 years ago. The patterns that couldn't be natural. The visitors that were coming, whether the galaxy was prepared or not. "How long?" Bray finally asked. "Before the Concord realizes they need us?" 2 weeks, perhaps 3. "Before they're willing to meet our terms. That depends on how badly things fall apart." Takamura's expression was grim but resolved. "And before the anomalies reach inhabited space, 6 months at their current velocity." The Admiral turned off the display with a gesture. Humanity tried to warn them. Now we'll save ourselves. And if possible, we'll save them too, but on our terms. As the withdrawal continued across thousands of worlds, as human ships returned to Sol in a reverse diaspora unprecedented in galactic history, as conflicts bloomed in their absence, Earth prepared. Military installations that had been dormant for decades roared to life. Research facilities worked around the clock on technologies the Concorde had deemed too dangerous to pursue. Humanity wasn't abandoning the galaxy. They were preparing to save it. But this time, they would lead, not follow. The awakening storm. 2 weeks after Earth's withdrawal, the galaxy was discovering just how much they had taken humanity for granted. On the once prosperous trade hub of Nexus Station, riots broke out as food shipments failed to arrive from agricultural worlds. The complex web of trade agreements that had kept goods flowing smoothly across dozens of species' territories had been negotiated and overseen by human mediators. Without them, ancient suspicions resurfaced, bureaucratic obstacles multiplied, and essential supply chains collapsed. "They're turning away our ships at the Cygni checkpoint," reported the station administrator to an increasingly desperate council of merchant representatives. "The Vordae are demanding triple the usual inspection fees, and the Hess Consortium is refusing to honor the transit protocols entirely." "But those are settled agreements," protested a Minervian trade delegate. "They'd been in place for decades." "Yes," the administrator replied grimly, "with human enforcement provisions that no longer exist." Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds and stations. The galactic economy, which had grown increasingly integrated under human-led initiatives, began to fragment along old racial and political lines. Markets crashed. Resource shortages triggered panic. Planets that had specialized their economies under the promise of stable trade suddenly found themselves vulnerable. In the power vacuum, opportunists thrived. The Cantari Dominion expanded aggressively into 3 previously neutral systems. The Dorsai hegemony annexed a mineral-rich asteroid belt that had been under dispute for centuries. Smaller powers formed hasty alliances, trying to protect themselves in a galaxy where the rules suddenly seemed optional. Within the inner sanctum of the now-expanded Security Council bunker on Mars, Admiral Marcus Hayes, who had replaced the retiring Takamura, observed the spreading chaos with grim satisfaction. "Phase 3 reports, General Chen," he ordered. The general, Ilara Chen's brother, who had chosen the military path while she pursued diplomacy, activated a secure holographic display. Fleet deployment at 87% completion. The Jupiter and Neptune defense grids are online. The Kuiper Belt Early Warning Network is active on all frequencies. And Project Aegis. On schedule, sir. The first prototypes have passed all simulations. Production will begin next week. Hayes nodded, studying the strategic projections. And the Concorde's response. Exactly as predicted. Their delegation has been waiting at the edge of our system for 3 days. Their messages are becoming increasingly desperate. Hayes allowed himself a brief smile. Let them wait another day. I want them to fully appreciate their position. A junior officer approached with a datapad. "Sir, we've intercepted communications from the Centauri sector. The situation with the indigenous Nauri has deteriorated." Hayes scanned the report, his expression hardening. The Nauri, the pre-technological species whose exploitation Earth had protested, were now facing outright enslavement by the consortium of corporate interests that had claimed their world. Without human observers present, the consortium had dropped all pretense of guided development. "Document everything," Hayes ordered. "This will be Exhibit A when we present our terms." General Chen studied the Admiral thoughtfully. "The public narrative is that we withdrew to force the Concorde to reform its corrupt practices. But that's not the whole truth, is it, sir?" Hayes considered the man carefully before responding. "No, General. Corruption was a symptom, not the disease. The real problem is that the Concorde has grown complacent, fragmented, unable to act decisively. He gestured to another display showing the mysterious anomalies, now clearly resolved as massive objects moving through deep space. And with what's coming, complacency will be fatal. High Chancellor Vexterra of the Atraxian Collective faced the most humiliating moment of their long political career. After 5 days of being ignored at the edge of the Sol system, their delegation had finally been granted permission to approach Earth, but not to the diplomatic reception they expected. Instead, they found themselves in a stark military facility carved into the lunar surface, faced not by Earth's diplomatic corps, but by a panel of stern-faced military and intelligence officials. "We expected to meet with Ambassador Chen," Vexterra said, light patterns flickering rapidly within their containment suit, a sign of agitation. "Ambassador Chen has been reassigned." Admiral Hayes replied coolly. "I speak for Earth now." "This is highly irregular," protested Telok of the Minervian Republic. "Military officials do not conduct diplomatic negotiations." "These are not negotiations," Hayes corrected. "These are terms." The alien delegation stirred uncomfortably as Hayes activated a display showing dozens of conflict zones that had erupted since Earth's withdrawal. "In just 2 weeks," Hayes continued, "we've seen 17 armed conflicts break out. Trade has collapsed in 4 major sectors. The Nauri species faces extinction-level exploitation, and the Concord has proven utterly incapable of addressing any of it. These are temporary disruptions," Vexterra insisted, "if Earth would return to its diplomatic duties." "No," Hayes interrupted sharply. "Earth will not return to being the galaxy's unpaid peacekeepers while the Concord ignores our concerns and blocks our initiatives. But we are prepared to re-engage on new terms." He activated another display, this one showing a document titled "The Sol Protocols." "These are our conditions for return. They include fundamental reforms to the Concord's voting structure, mandatory investigation of corruption claims, enforceable protections for developing species, and most critically, the establishment of a unified defense initiative under joint command." "Defense against what?" asked Ambassador Krulzek skeptically. "The galaxy is at peace, or was, until your withdrawal." Hayes exchanged glances with his staff before activating the final display, detailed scans of the approaching anomalies. "These objects entered the galaxy's outer boundary 3 years ago. They're artificial, they're massive, and they're headed toward populated space. Their configuration suggests a fleet. Their trajectory suggests purpose." The alien delegates stared in stunned silence. "We brought this evidence to the Concord Security Council," Hayes continued. "It was dismissed as insufficient. We requested resources for deeper investigation. Denied. We suggested preliminary defense preparations. Ignored." Tilak leaned forward, examining the scans with growing alarm. "Why weren't we informed? I sit on the Security Council, and I never saw this." "Ask your Chancellor," Hayes replied coldly. "The data was classified at the highest levels, buried by those who didn't want to divert resources from their private interests to a hypothetical threat." Vexterra's light patterns had slowed to a troubled pulse. "Even if these objects exist, there's no proof they're hostile." "There's no proof they're friendly either," Hayes countered. "But we do know they're deliberately concealing their approach, using interstellar dust clouds for cover, adjusting course to avoid detection by standard sensor arrays. These are not the actions of peaceful visitors." He stood, towering over the seated delegates. "Humanity tried to work within your system. We were patient. We followed your rules. And in return, you ignored an existential threat to all sentient life in this galaxy." Hayes's voice lowered, becoming dangerously quiet. "So here are your choices. Accept our terms, implement the Sol protocols immediately, and face this threat together, or continue without us. But understand this, with or without the Concord, Earth will be ready when they arrive." 6 days later, in an emergency session of the full Galactic Concord, Chancellor Vexterra stood before the assembled representatives of over 300 species. The Grand Chamber, which had been filled with angry recriminations just weeks earlier, was now silent with dread. "The evidence cannot be disputed," Vexterra announced, their voice modulator set to maximum solemnity. "The human data has been independently verified. Something is indeed approaching, an armada of unknown origin and intent." Murmurs of fear rippled through the chamber. "For too long, we have allowed personal interests and ancient prejudices to override common sense and common purpose. We have relied on humanity to be our conscience, our mediator, our peacekeeper, while often ignoring their counsel." The Chancellor's light patterns shifted to a deep blue of regret. "That ends today. Before you is the text of what will be known as the Sol Concordat, a reformed charter for our galactic community that incorporates the human terms while preserving our essential values." The vote that followed wasn't even close. Faced with both immediate chaos and an approaching external threat, the Concord embraced change with unprecedented speed. On the newly established Joint Defense Command Station orbiting Earth's moon, Admiral Hayes met Ambassador Chen as she prepared to return to diplomatic service. "You were right," he acknowledged as they gazed out at the assembled fleet, ships from dozens of species now training together under the provisions of the Sol Concordat. "They needed to see what the galaxy would become without us." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And you were right that we needed to be prepared to stand alone. The truth is, we needed both approaches." Hayes turned to watch a massive Atraxian dreadnought practicing maneuvers alongside smaller, more agile human vessels, former adversaries becoming comrades. "Will it be enough?" Chen asked quietly. "When they arrive?" Hayes considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, I would have said no. Too divided, too unprepared. But now, he gestured to the unprecedented coalition forming before them. "Now we have a fighting chance." Chen smiled slightly. "It took humanity walking away for the galaxy to understand what we've been trying to tell them all along. Sometimes the most powerful diplomatic statement is silence," Hayes replied. "They had to see what the universe looks like without us before they could truly value what we bring to it." As they spoke, thousands of ships throughout the galaxy were being retrofitted with the defensive technologies Earth had developed in secret. Training programs were integrating disparate military traditions into a cohesive force. Early warning systems were being deployed in an expanding network. And somewhere in the darkness beyond, the unknown visitors continued their approach, unaware that their carefully concealed advance had been detected, unaware that instead of finding a fractured, vulnerable collection of civilizations, they would face a galaxy united, prepared, and led by the species that had mastered both the art of peace and the necessity of war. Humanity had withdrawn not to abandon the galaxy, but to save it on their terms. And in doing so, they had transformed from the Concord's conscience to its vanguard. The visitors would arrive in 4 months, expecting easy conquest. They were in for a surprise.